What's going on? My name is Michael, and in this video I'm talking about my first impressions of Apple's new MacBook Pro 14-inch after using it for a few days. This thing is awesome. Apple finally gave us everything that we wanted. They brought the ports back, they made it thicker and heavier and more powerful, and we got a new awesome display also. So in this video, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the MacBook Pro 14-inch, and I'll give you my first impressions. So the MacBook Pro that I got is the absolute base model, so this is the cheapest one you can get. When I first took it out of the box, the first thing I noticed is just how thick and how heavy it felt in the hand. When you're holding it in your actual hands, it feels more comfortable because the corners are now rounded instead of very, very sharp like on Apple's last MacBook. It just feels like a better object to hold in your hand. With Apple's previous Pro notebook lineup, it feels like they tried to make them as thin as possible, and the edges were like razor blades. So they're very uncomfortable to hold. And when you knock on it, it feels so dense. And a Pro notebook really doesn't need to be that dense because air needs to be able to move through the internals. And it seems like that's what Apple did with this notebook. They made it a little bit thicker so the internals can have a little bit more room to breathe. I really like how the keyboard now is black. So Apple has an anodization process now for the aluminum before they put the keyboard in. So it just really gives it that Pro look. Now the touch bar has been replaced with full-size function keys. Thank you, Apple. I hate the touch bar. I can't tell you how many times I just wanted to change my volume or hit the escape key and the touch bar completely froze and I have to restart my MacBook. So the touch bar is back. Touch ID is also easier to find now because the actual button itself is bigger. And I just like being able to, when I want to turn up the volume, hit the volume button. When I want to turn up the brightness, hit the brightness button. It's perfect. This is what a Pro notebook needs to be. You're staring at the screen and you're using your fingers to type on the keyboard and the trackpad. You don't need a touch screen where your fingers are. It just makes no sense. I love how Apple brought back the ports finally. So back in 2016, Apple replaced every single port with USB-C Thunderbolt 3. So now we have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, an HDMI port, an SD card slot, and Apple finally brought back MagSafe with MagSafe 3 for Mac. So it's a little bit thinner than the previous version of MagSafe, but it works just like MagSafe used to on the old MacBooks. Now the cable though is way more durable, so it's braided. And also if the cable starts to fray as you use it over the years, you don't have to replace the entire brick as it connects with USB-C now to the wall adapter. So pretty much Apple answered all of the problems that we were saying we had with the old MacBook. And like I said, this MacBook just feels like it's fixing Apple's mistakes. When you open up the display, you're gonna notice that there is a notch. Now the notch houses the front-facing camera. There is no Face ID on this Mac, but it really isn't that bad because of the quality of the display that you get. So I wasn't expecting a huge difference coming from, I had an M1 MacBook Air and now I'm going to the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I didn't think I'd notice that much of a difference with the display, but the mini LED technology really looks to me like an OLED screen on a Mac. So the colors are way more saturated, the blacks get completely pitch black, and even text just looks a lot more sharper than the normal LCD panels that we had on the previous MacBooks. So even though there is a notch, I really think that the OLED looking mini LED display really improves the macOS experience. And also another thing is the rounding of the corners. So when Apple rounds the corners of their display, to me it really feels like it's freeing up the display and it has a little bit of room to breathe. And now whenever I go back to a MacBook that has the regular square edges, it just feels like it's very cramped and I don't have much room to work. The screen also refreshes at 120 Hertz, or I should say up to 120 Hertz with Apple's ProMotion technology. So it's very similar to actually the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which has mini LED and 120 Hertz, and you're now getting that on a MacBook Pro. So because you are controlling the MacBook down with your fingers on the keyboard and the trackpad area, 120 Hertz isn't as noticeable as it is on a touch device like an iPhone or an iPad. Even though I still can notice the difference with 120 Hertz on the MacBook when you're moving windows around and you're swiping between your app pages, it just doesn't look as noticeable on the MacBook because your method of input on this computer isn't directly touching the screen. For performance, the M1 Pro chip inside my base model MacBook Pro is extremely fast. Now, for day-to-day operations, I wouldn't say I notice it being faster than my iMac behind me, but when I edit videos or do anything graphically intense, even this base model, the cheapest 14-inch MacBook Pro, it feels faster than any computer I've ever used. The most powerful MacBook I had before this, I believe, was the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro. And this machine is able to export videos twice as fast as that old laptop was of mine. So that just really tells you how efficient Apple's chips are compared to Intel. And if you have an Intel Mac coming up in the next year or two, it may be time to upgrade just because Apple's technology really is that much better. With Apple redesigning macOS and what it looks like, starting with Big Sur last year, and now putting their own chips inside the Mac, it really feels like the Mac is now just a part of that Apple ecosystem, whereas before with the Intel chips and the older skeuomorphism design of macOS, it just felt kind of disconnected. But now when I open something like the Reminders app or iMessage, it just feels like whenever I make a change, it's instant on all my other iOS devices. In fact, it almost feels like an iOS device because of how connected it is to the ecosystem. I'll give you one more example. So whenever I had an Intel Mac, switching between my AirPods was pretty janky and slow. But now with the M1 and the M1 Pro based chips of Apple-made silicon, AirPod connections just happen instantly because it feels like it's more connected directly with the Apple ecosystem. So I can really see what Apple is going for with ditching Intel and putting their own chips inside these machines. It really does make a huge difference. And along with those chips come better battery life. So if you're able to get better performance and better battery life from a chip that's made by Apple, I have absolutely no idea why you would buy an Intel Mac. Apple still actually sells some Intel Macs, which makes no sense to me. I wouldn't recommend buying those at all, just because Apple's silicon is so darn efficient. But the battery life has been extremely impressive on this MacBook Pro. I did a video running tests. I didn't quite get Apple's numbers that they quoted for video playback, but still very, very impressive for a pro level notebook that consumes a lot of watts. A few other tidbits here I want to throw in with the computer. The speakers, they're absolutely amazing. I don't even use the little Bluetooth speaker that's sitting in my room, and also I have a HomePod mini in my room. Those I don't even use anymore just because the speakers on this thing are so good. Apple's 6-speaker system, it's not marketing, guys. It really is insane. I don't know how they fit a speaker system this good inside a MacBook, but it's blow away, at least for the music I listen to, which is a lot of rock and metal. So the sound quality on this MacBook is absolutely insane. Also, the headphone jack is a high fidelity headphone jack, so there is a digital analog converter or a DAC inside this, which is good if you're a pro using high quality headphones. And also another little tidbit is they moved the MacBook Pro logo from just below the screen. Now it's etched in the aluminum on the bottom, and it really gives it a classy look. And also Apple made the Apple logo on the back of this notebook huge, as it should be, to stand out and really tell people, I have the new one. I'm really a fan of Apple's design language with this MacBook. Now every time I see an old MacBook sitting on a table, it looks old. That's kind of what Apple does. Whenever this laptop is open, I like how the back of the screen panel is completely flat, whereas the old model MacBooks, they had kind of that curve and that taper to the back of the screen. So if you couldn't tell already, I love this MacBook. It literally fixes every problem I had with MacBooks before. Intel chips are now gone. The screen on a MacBook is no longer LCD. It looks like an OLED, even though it's micro LED or mini LED. The notch, I could do without, but it really makes the screen feel like it's more expansive and has more room to breathe. The ports are back, so I use the SD card slot literally every single day. The only thing I wish is maybe it had a regular USB-A port, just one, but I think that's kind of hard for Apple to justify bringing back an old legacy port, but hey, I'm happy with MagSafe, HDMI, and SD card. I'm not gonna complain. Oh, and also something I forgot. When you plug in the computer with the new MagSafe connector, you also get that status LED back, which is really convenient if you want to charge your MacBook and know if it's all the way charged before you head out the door. So very convenient having that little status LED right on MagSafe. So I want to know your guys' thoughts in the comments. If you bought one of these, tell me down below and tell me which size and configuration you got. I really want to hear what you guys have to say. That will pretty much do it. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Michael. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.